Here's my spanner, fitting that carefully over there so I don't thump it into the back of the lens. Oh, it's tight. Okay, there's my shutter and lens assembly. There's the retaining ring. Put that to one side. Back to the body. I want the door off first. 2 screws. One at the top, one at the bottom. There may be 1, 2, 3 or even 4 washers in between the door and the body casting. Not seeing anything on the door. There's 1, or is that 2? 1 I think, from the top. Thick one from the top, thinner one from the base. Right, this screw at the top here, that couples to our rangefinder. We need that out. That's on this an arm here, which fitted to this ring, and this ring fits to the inner helical with 2 small screws. And the arm is hinged so that it all folds away when it needs to. There are 2 screws holding this shroud in place. They're chromed brass, easily damaged. And if you do scratch one up, when you put the camera back together, put it in this position where it can't be seen easily. And keep your pretty one to the top where it can be seen easily. Those are all in good order, so no problem there. That was just a little guide bush for it, and you didn't see it, but that was the gear that runs on the front there that was under that shroud. Okay, this piece here is called the sleeve. Now the shutter release runs through that, and let's see if we can get this in position. Now, if you allow your shutter release shaft to pull out of the camera while you're working on it, that sleeve has got a bit of a propensity to fall in, and basically it falls into the gap down there between the front standard here and the bellows, and of course nothing works after that, and you can't open and close the front of the camera. Alright, so here I need to mark my focus helical and my focus scale ring so that I know where everything goes back together. So normally I mark these where the inner and outer helical are level with each other. So I'm just trying to work out what point that happens with here. I'm not finding out. Yeah, about there. And normally I need to mark this so that I can put everything back together where it came from. So I usually put a double scribe line at the base, like that, and a single one at the top. And that just allows me to be sure that I've got the focus scale ring and the helicals correctly assembled together so that the focus will be correct once the camera's reassembled. And generally speaking, that's a pretty straightforward process. If you know where it came from and you put it back in the same place, well, everything's going to be good again afterwards. These 4 black screws hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. There's a felt pad in between the two. Sometimes that gets stuck to both the bellows and the back of the front standard, and something's got to give at that stage when you take them apart. So it's not uncommon for that felt spacer to get torn in two. It doesn't matter. Put it back together as best you are able and that'll be good enough. The Retina 3 Big C cameras didn't even have one. And it's the same setup apart from that. We'll get those 4 black screws out of the way. Here's our inner and outer helical. They're pretty sticky with gooey dried out grease. And then 4 screws hold the mount here into the front standard. And now I've got to be thinking of other reasons that that film advance was sticking on the advance stroke. It can go into the cleaner. Now the bellows are certainly stuck here. Give them a wee push. So you can hear that felt tearing away. Yeah, it's stuck on one, and deal with that when I get to it. Right. This whole assembly is held in with 4 screws, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. Very, very tight. Well, that one's loose. That one's loose. Oh, 2 out of 4 is not bad. Okay, hammer time for these ones. What I need is a nicely scaled down impact driver. This will do. A couple of taps with the hammer and those screws loosen up immediately if you've got to put a bit of tension on that screwdriver. That's it. You just need a sharp wrap. You don't need to try and drive the screw through the camera. That would not be a good thing. Okay, so there we have it. That's our front section off. That's the sleeve, which just to catch us out, won't fall out by itself today, but that will often fall out by itself if the shutter release is removed. I'm just going to press in the 2 buttons, top and bottom, slide these 2 sections apart. That inner just slides out to the rear. There are 2 little coil springs from underneath the buttons. Here we have the trigger, the finger that works the release on the shutter, and this is pressed from the release on the camera at that point. This one has a plate underneath it. Most of them do not have a plate underneath them. And this one has a return spring here. Most of them have that return spring. The very earliest ones did not. So that's okay, that's in bits. The last thing here is our shaft that transfers the action from the cocking rack through to the front of the camera. This is the rear half of that shaft that we saw earlier at the front of the camera. There's our camera body. Now you can see our felt light trap thingy washery shim here. You can see that's all torn to buggery. That I will peel off there and I will glue it all back onto the back here neatly, and that'll be good. So yeah, basically it was stuck to both surfaces. Why was it stuck to both surfaces? I've got no idea. So I'll just get this off here. I'm just levering this away with that scalpel. I'm not cutting anything. Okay, here's that bit, and all I need to do excuse me, is put that all back together in there. Easy. And there's our camera body. Not much to note, little bit of dust, hardly any, a bit of dried grease. Inside the camera, not even any film chips. That means it's been used by careful owners. All of these sections, you can see the state of that. Look at that nice brown colour. That's supposed to be black. That's just dirty, dried out grease there and the dust that it's gathered. Same there and visible in the top. So all of this stuff needs to be cleaned. These bits are going into the ultrasonic cleaner. They'll get one cycle with the degreasing agent, and then they'll get another cycle with domestic ammonia based detergent, and once they're rinsed and dried they will look sparkly. They will be cleaner than they were in the factory when the camera was assembled for the first time. Right, I'll go away and deal with that. Well, I've got a nice tray of sparkly parts, and I better, all the other bits have been cleaned up pretty much, and I've just got to get this back into the camera. So this will need to be put back in place. First thing I'll do is I'll apply some adhesive under these that loose bit there and push those down into position. Of course, the felt is somewhat stretched out of shape. Which is a nuisance, but probably not to be avoided. Just fighting with the lid of my glue tube, which is not playing the game. Of course, the manufacturer of the adhesive used a plastic in the past that the glue wouldn't stick to make the cap for the glue tube, which was you know, a clever thing to do. Meant that you could get the top off nice and easy. But somewhere along the line someone has decided that whatever polymer it was that they used to make the caps out of was unavailable or too expensive, and now the adhesive sticks to cap very well indeed. So as a result, it's always a trial to get the cap off the tube. Okay, there's no it's exactly the sort of thing that happens over time. Things get designed, production manager comes along, says we can make this cheaper if we just do it this way or that way, or substitute some other method or material, and the product, instead of being made as designed, gets made differently. See if we can get this piece of felt sitting in here somewhat tidily. Oh yes, that's starting to look like something. Just get the adhesive down where I need it to be. That will do. A bit of tidying up work, I think. Okay, that's ready to put back. So where do we start? Well, we can actually start here. I'll start getting the pieces together that I need, which is the shutter release part there. We'll need that button and that button. Need that, that one, we're going to need the shaft from the camera body, the bracket that holds that in place, which is not that one, that one, and the screw for that, which I'll find in a minute. Anyway, first things first. There are two screws. It's the one with the smaller diameter head that goes here. Just tighten those two screws up. And the spring that returns that is here. That's great. I'll lubricate that shortly with a bit of graphite powder. The camera body. Right, I'll need to put this in place, so I'll put a bit of synthetic grease on that. Well, here's the shutter cocking rack after cleaning. And these teeth, particularly at this point in here, are slightly distorted. You might be able to see that in the camera, I'm not sure. So I'm just going to straighten those up. I think I've shown that on a previous video if you go back and look for it. So I'll get that trued up. That rack is in far too good a condition to consider replacing it, but it certainly needs some attention. That looks a little bit better to me. I think that'll be better. I'm sure it would have worked fine before, but it should run a bit smoother now. I need to lubricate this. I'm going to lubricate this with some graphite powder. Because of the broad flat surfaces here, I don't want to use grease. It's likely to get sticky over time, and with broad flat surfaces like that, grease just tends to stick things. It's not helpful at all. I'll get some graphite powder. I'll just drop a little bit of graphite powder in here and here, and then just work this repeatedly to work that graphite powder in. I'll knock off the excess and go and blow that away. Now I can assemble these components. So we have the return buttons, the return springs for our buttons, the buttons top and bottom of the front standard are what needs to, that's what locks it in place. You have to press these buttons in order to release the front standard. Now I'll just see a bit of adhesive has got round the corner there from when I was gluing that piece on, so let me get rid of that. That's better. We don't want that. So these buttons and springs, the springs do not go over the pins, the springs go into the holes. Put the springs into the holes, otherwise it will not work and you will not like the result. One at the top, one at the bottom. Okay, so I'm squeezing those buttons in between finger and thumb. Now I can slide the lens standard into the shroud from the back, slide it right through, they click up into place. That's all that was required there. Now lubrication. These tracks, top and bottom, need to be lubricated. I'm using synthetic grease to do that. That's what the front standard runs on as you slide it in and out. It's about the only place it actually contacts that shroud, except when it's fully extended and then it's contacting it on the inside at the front here. Checking that runs smoothly. And apply some from the front. Now the buttons travel, they run against this inside surface here and here under spring tension. So a little bit of synthetic grease there is a helpful thing to make it run smoothly. This piece here called the sleeve can now go in place. So you got to hold this down with your finger, feed the sleeve in from behind, get it in position, release that, and usually I collapse the front down this much so that sleeve cannot go away, it can't fall out. That's ready to install in the camera. But first we need to put the shaft in, the transfer shaft that couples to the cocking rack. So I'm going to lubricate the little pinion on the back of that, both sides. That goes in here in the top corner and is held in place with this L-shaped bracket. The L-shaped bracket is held in place with a single round head screw. It's the only one like that in the camera. And what's critical here is that there's enough clearance between that bracket and the casting so that the rack will move smoothly. And what I've found from experience is using a feeler gauge of 4/1000ths of an inch, or 0.102 millimeters, this tells me, is the appropriate clearance. So I'll tighten that in place, check that the rack moves smoothly. Seems to be a bit of reluctance there. I'm just looking to see if that bracket's not quite square. Let me square that up. No, that moves nicely now. Check that I have that clearance. Yep. If the clearance is too big, what will happen is that instead of the rack contacting the pinion across the entire width of that piece of metal, it's only contacting it over part of the width, and in which case their teeth will wear out because they're working much too hard. So it's important that the clearance is not too big, and if the clearance is too little, then this is stiff. If there's no clearance there, this is very stiff in its action and will not move smoothly. That all looks very good. So at that stage I'm ready to put the front on, or put this section in rather.